A big hello to you, it's so great to see you, and I do hope that you are well. I'm Jenny Kirk, welcoming you up here to Weir Yard, and today we're going to be taking a look at the latest release from Heljan. This is the O2, but it's not the Class O2 that I know a lot of people are waiting for in both O and O gauge. No, this is the Gresley O2, a 280 consolidation wheel arrangement locomotive that the LNER inherited initially from the Great Northern Railway. In some ways it was eclipsed a little bit by the Robinson 8K, later to be known as the O4, that they inherited in large numbers by way of the Great Central Railway, and later on as an awful lot of great deals with war surplus. The O2, however, did prove its worth, and a number of different batches were produced by the LNER to roughly the same design, right through into the early 1940s. And it's a great shame that whilst these locomotives were very long-lasting, right through into British Railways days, none of the members of the class got preserved. Now, Heljan did bring out a model of this a number of years ago, but it did suffer a little bit with a few reliability issues with the motor and drivetrain, and these have now been set upon by Heljan and completely reworked. So what we've got is hopefully going to be an amazing performer and really, really reliable, which are definitely two things that we want to see from our model trains. They've also taken the opportunity to tool up a few extra pieces which allow them to represent even more of the class members. There's quite a few different detail arrangements, not least the cabs, and it's this area that Heljan have turned their attention to, and the example that they've very kindly loaned us for review features the all-new tooled cab. So come with me and let's see whether the all-new release of the Heljan 280 Gresley O2 heavy freight locomotives have the performance that matches the full-size prototypes that were renowned for being some of the most powerful freight locomotives on British railways right up until the Riddle's 9F came to the rails. But don't forget too to hit that like button as we go through this video if you like what you see, and also consider sharing it as well to social media. It's a really great way of showing your support for the channel, and more importantly showing other railway modelers just what there is available out there. And please consider subscribing to the channel if you've not already done so. Completely free, obviously, but it's a good way of keeping up to date with our video content. And just a reminder, we've got an affiliate link down below in the description box that takes you to TMC, the Model Centre, where every single version of this locomotive can be ordered at what we believe to be the keenest online price. But does the Gresley O2 live up to its prototype's legacy? Come with me and let's take a close look. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabriek.co.uk. Additional support comes from...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com, and don't miss out on your latest loco.
The latest release to come through from Heljan is actually a re-release of an older model, but the model itself has gone through some refinement since then. There were some issues with reliability, and Heljan has taken on board the feedback to improve this, as well as tooling up for alternative versions of things like the cabs to actually make the model able to represent more members of the class. They were a really successful designed locomotive, appearing during the Great Northern Railway period under the stewardship of Gresley, and were later built in batches by the LNER right up and into the 1940s, so it could be considered a very successful design, and there would no doubt have been far more of these if it wasn't for the fact that there was a great deal of the Robinson 8K, later LNER 04 locomotives that were available as war surplus from the First World War. When this originally appeared in the Heljan range, there were a few issues with reliability of the mechanism, and Heljan have taken this on board and completely redone the mechanism in these models, and they've taken the opportunity to tool up for some of the alternative versions of, in particular, the cabs, so that they can represent more different versions of this locomotive. Now, the 02 was actually a progression of what had become the Gresley 03 locomotive. It was originally categorised as the 01, but the LNER really liked to keep the premier number in a classification for their latest iteration. So when the Thomson 01 rebuilds of the 04 started appearing, the 01 was reclassified as the 03. Now, the difference between the 03 and the 02 was actually the number of cylinders. The 02 is a 3-cylinder machine, which means it's got a central cylinder as well as the two on the outside. These gave a great deal of advantages over the 03 class in that the pistons could be made smaller and this reduced the amount of wear. You also had a greater deal of torque because the actual throw of power was smoothed out with 3 power strokes on every revolution as opposed to 2, so you got a little bit less of that dramatic hammer blow, and with that lessened wear, these were certainly a very reliable machine. They didn't last into preservation, and it is perhaps unfortunate that what had been one of the most powerful freight locomotives on Britain's railways, certainly until the 9Fs appeared, passed into obscurity as the last of these was withdrawn and scrapped in the 1960s. At the Warnerley show at the NEC, Heljan very kindly loaned us this model for review. It's catalogue number 3902, BR Early Emblem Black 02/2 as number 63933 with the Great Northern cab and tender, and these are representative of some of the new tooling that Heljan has put into the model. The box itself is very substantial and features line art of the locomotive, and once we get into this we've got a little bit of an owner's manual, and this gives some information on getting into the model and also adjusting the tender drawbar. All models, including DCC ready, come with a factory fitted speaker, and this makes things a lot easier if you want to go down the route of adding in your own sound installation. I'm just going to get this out. We've got the standard blister pack, and there's actually just a little warning there just to remind people that these are a precision model and you've got to be careful when handling. There's an extra detail bag, and we've got the slimline NEM pocket couplings, and also some cosmetic drop link couplings here, and these are a kind of either or. If you fit the slimline tension locks, you can't fit these, but they are something that I think a lot of people might want to fit on the front of the locomotive instead of the tension lock, but you do get that flexibility. The actual blister packaging is a little bit more complex than other manufacturers. We've got these side pieces as well as the usual clamshell, and just going to very, very carefully get in there and get the locomotive out from within. The first impressions of this model is quite simply the weight. I've never known a model quite this heavy. There is a huge amount of weight in this, and it really is quite pleasing to see. Now, just to compare it to the weight of a Robinson 8K, later LNER 04, it is substantially heavier than what is actually already quite a heavy model. Looking on the underside, we'll start here We've got all-wheel drive to all 8 of the driving wheels there, and I can also see that we've got pickups, these kind of sprung-loaded wipers on the backs of all 8, and these come in sort of sprung pairs. The brake rigging too gives us a lot of clearance down the centre if you should need to get the keeper plate off. That is really easy, and there are no need to user add any of these parts. The same for the drain cocks as well. These are quite neatly applied at the base of the cylinders, which is a nice touch because often these get left behind in the detail pack, and often on a lot of classes of locomotives interfere with the front bogie. No such problems with this locomotive. Looking further back, we've got this tender drawbar affair so that the locomotive and tender are semi-permanently coupled. You're not going to end up trying to pull your train on those wires, which can cause damage. And there we've got 3 different settings on the rear that you can reset the positioning and bring the tender and locomotive closer together. We also have additional pickups there playing on the backs of all 6 of the tender wheels, so I cannot see any situation really where a stay alive is going to be necessary for this model. And again, we've got the brake rigging factory fitted. Looking to the very back there, we have a NEM pocket discreetly fitted between the rearmost axle, and that's for the rear coupling. And if I look to the front, we have a moulding into the front of the front bogie, which takes the other slimline tension lock should it be required. It's actually a little bit difficult to handle this, such is the weight. You've got to be ever so careful about what you pick it up from, simply because there's so much weight in there, which hopefully is going to make for a really good performer on the track. I'm actually really looking forward to that, just seeing whether it comes close to rivaling the Bayer Garrett from the same manufacturer that really did break all records here on Weir Yard. The wheels are really quite pleasing. We've got them finished in this chemically blackened finish, and that includes the treads on the tyres and also all these coupling rods. These are correctly fluted and jointed here between the 3rd and 4th axles as per the prototype. The rest of the valve gear really is quite well detailed. You can see they're all metal parts, and that does look to be quite robust, and again, I'm looking forward to getting this running. The brake blocks line up with the wheel treads, and you can see there they are very close fitting, exactly in keeping with what would be on the prototype without actually dragging on the wheel running surfaces. The running plate is quite slender. This actually feels like a plastic part, which is a little bit of a departure from what is clearly a lot of metal components in this, but it does allow a very thin running plate, capturing that look of the prototype, which has this kind of raked up and then down at the front affair, which really did make these stand out. Unlike the Thomson 01s, which had an almost utilitarian running plate, these do seem to capture the Edwardian feel of this locomotive. The front cylinders look to be metal as well, very substantial, and it really does improve the paint finish. I always say painted metal looks like painted metal far more than painted plastic ever can. The actual black finish on this is a kind of satin, so there is an oily shine to it, but not so much as to be unnecessarily glossy, and this would mean that this locomotive is a perfect starting point either for a work-weary weathering or to keep in this kind of ex-works condition. The front face of the locomotive is captured really well, and here's where we have some of the subtle detailing with the printing. The 63933 smokebox number plate is on there. We've got the smokebox dart, which is a separate fitted. It feels like it could be plastic, but it is really quite well detailed. And then we've got a really sharp 35B shed code plate down there underneath. The buffer beam is picked out in red. You can see that hole there for putting that additional coupling should it be required. I always think that actually just having the hook in place is something which would be a great compromise, because for those wanting to use that front coupling, you're left with this kind of big square hole in the front buffer beam, and it does seem to be a little bit of a shame. The vacuum standard is factory fitted. It feels to be made of plastic. It's nicely on there actually. No risk of that just falling free. And then we've got sprung loaded front couplings, and these really do look nice, although the actual buffer heads themselves, it's difficult to tell, but they look a little bit on the chunky side. I'm suspecting that they could well be made of plastic rather than metal. It's very, very difficult to tell, it must be said. It's not actually detracting from the model, but they just look a little bit thicker than I would have thought. The rest of the model, there's a lot of detail here. Heljan weren't kidding in that warning about the number of precision parts that go into assembling these. You can see we've got the rivet detail represented around the smoke box, and the funnel on top too is moulded as part of the smoke box. We don't get any parting lines whatsoever, and looking down it, there's no sign of a bottom, so that does look pretty good. I know from having scrutinised the diagrams, the huge weight that's inside these doesn't extend quite all the way into the smoke box, so should you wish, with a sound installation, it's quite possible to put a sugar cube speaker down there underneath the funnel, and that would add to the realism of any sound installation. The boiler bands on these are picked out quite nicely in the moulding. It really is still quite crisp when you consider this is a second run from the tooling, albeit with a number of amendments having been made. The dome is captured pretty well. We've got the dimple on the top. This looks to be a separately fitted part, but it does fit really quite snugly, such that there's no sign of any gaps where there shouldn't be. Moving further back, we've got some boiler washout plugs there, 3 to each side by the look of it. It is interesting actually, they are in different positions on each side as per the prototype. Handrails on these are all separately applied in metal and very, very robust. With a plastic running plate, we've got a lot of air gap just through underneath. It is quite an interesting designed locomotive. We've got the frame details on the side. That appears to be a metal casting, and we've got a load of gussets and other different bits and pieces on there, which are nicely and crisply picked out. Further back, some very large sandboxes with these sanding pipes feeling like they're made from plastic, but the boxes themselves incorporated as a solid piece as part of that chassis. The arc at the back, we've got part of the brake rigging at the bottom, and this hides some of the wiring which goes between locomotive and tender. If you're bothered about the black and red wiring, then a little dab with some satin black paint will certainly deal with that. I recommend personally Humbrol number 85 as being a really good paint colour just to try and match up. We've got very crisp number printing, 63933 and the RA6. Now these cabs always seem to be very utilitarian from the side. We've got a metal handrail and a few rivet detail there picked out, but there's no side windows. But on the front we do have some actually quite generous cab glazing. This is flush finished from the factory. It's flush at the front and it's flush at the back as well. This is something that Heljan does do very, very well. So it's nice to see we're not dealing with that kind of big block of clear glazing across the inside of the cab. Looking to the top, we have just a whistle on the front of the cab. That feels like a plastic part. It's finished in this brass. It really does look good. And then we've got turned metal safety valves. And these have the sort of salt and pepper look to them and really do look good. They're pretty firm in place and they are both straight and true. Now the cab roof itself, there's an ever so slight rake back at the back. It is a plastic moulded piece and this is part of the new tooling. And it does seem to have a little bit of a rake on both sides. It's not too excessive. It's difficult to tell how close that is to the real locomotives. Finding really good side-on pictures has been quite hard. The line artwork on the box actually shows it very straight, but you can imagine that with use these would get a little bit sagged, especially if they had crew members climbing up there for whatever reason. The cab roof has the subtlety of a few extra bits of rivet detail, that extra patch at the back, and the compound shape is captured really well. You can see that we've got a kind of a tumble home. There's no edges on this. It just it goes from the straight and it curves hard and then into the much more gentle ellipse of the roof. Looking to the tender, this is one of the many highlights of this model for me. That coal load is what comes from the factory. Now it appears to be glued in place, but it is definitely the best coal load that I've seen from any ready-to-run locomotive. Normally we deal with a moulded plastic load, and whilst some of them are quite credible in their own way, this is the only coal load that I've ever seen which really, truly, 100% looks exactly like coal. At the back of this open area we've got the water dome, and it's interesting to see we've got this weird circular pattern on top. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. It looks like it might be a little bit of a painting glitch. I'm not sure whether that is detail that is supposed to be there. Again, getting top-down pictures of the Gresley O2 is really hard to find, so I'm not 100% sure on that. It doesn't detract from the model. Certainly you could imagine a repaint gone awry, which would produce a very similar effect. I must admit I've painted stuff in the garden before now and made a hash of it, and the paint can crinkle and do that effect, so it's not really a major issue. The water filler is behind this separator across the middle, and that again separately added piece with the filler cap on top matching the correct pattern. I do like this flared out area at the back, which also includes these tank lifting eyes. They are moulded detail. You can just start to see a little bit of the paint build up against the moulding, which kind of makes them stand out just ever so slightly as not being separately fitted parts, but I don't really have an issue with that. We've got these additional Coke greedy rails which go all the way around the tender. These feel like they're metal. In fact, yes, I'm going to say that these are etched brass. They're actually surprisingly robust despite the warning in the packaging. This is far more robust than any plastic moulded parts that I've seen in a similar location, and I think that Heljan have done a really good job on this Great Northern Railway tender. We've got the frame detail, and that really is superb, with some of these brake riggings just visible there at the bottom. We've got the springs that look like real springs. There's a lot of detail in the different leaves in there. And then we've got the cutter weights, larger at the front, smaller at the back. And it does then give you a little bit of detail of the brake blocks and the wheels. The wheels too, just like we saw on the locomotive, we've got this black painted finish, and the treads, again, chemically blackened so that they don't stick out. The tender steps are very robust. These feel like metal too. There's a lot of use of metal on some of the detailed parts here, which does give it a really good sense of quality. Same on the locomotive, actually. No, that feels like it's a plastic part, but it is quite robust. We've got metal handrails, and then moving to the unicycling lion of the British Railways totem, that really is nicely realised. You can see all of the detail of the lion and of the wheel, and it does provide this welcome splash of colour on an otherwise utilitarian black locomotive. The back of the tender too, we've got that cutaway for that cosmetic coupling, and then the NEM pocket just visible there. The guard irons curve in and actually do match up with the wheel faces, which, well, they should. But of course, a 00 model is slightly narrow gauge compared with where it should be. And it's nice to see that these are all set up to match the wheelbase, so there's nothing which really points out and highlights the narrow gauge issue with British model trains. We've got a plastic vacuum standard on the back, and then additionally extra detail in the form of these steps. The lamp irons look to be, they are separately applied, but they do appear to be quite flat to the tender. It's not a huge issue, but normally you see these sticking out a little bit, and actually that does work quite well. Looking inside the cab, we've got a wealth of backhead detail. Now, a lot of this is moulded on, but the printing process, it just shows how good moulded detail can be made to look with a great printing process. As far as I can tell, the only separately applied pieces are the handle to open the firebox doors and those two bronze-coloured wheels. Everything else appears to be part of the moulding, and I must admit, it really is quite impressive, with needles visible on all of the gauges, and I do like the black and white chevrons too on the water gauges. It really does look good. Considering the size of the locomotive, the cab itself does feel a little bit on the cramped side. The crew are perched right at the very back, and without any kind of tender back for the cab, then they would have been very exposed. And you could imagine in winter and in driving rain, it might not necessarily have been the greatest place to be on the footplate of one of these machines. The front of the tender includes additional details such as the lockers, but where the coal would come out is completely moulded. There's no gap there. It's not really hugely noticeable, but I must admit that not having a moulded representation of the inside of the coal chute does seem to be a little bit of a change from some of the newer models that we've seen come through. That said, I don't think anybody's going to want to remove the coal load from this. That is glued in place, but it's so superb, really, it would be rude to try and remove that. And that does mean that we're probably going to get some really good space inside the tender for a DCC fit, which I'm going to show you exactly how to do. And I'm going to be using the Train-O-Matic 21-pin decoder that you can find at the link in the description. However, any 21-pin decoder should work, but do bear in mind that if you buy cheap, you may well find that your performance is impaired. Today's video is sponsored by TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for finding all of the models featured today at the best possible price at the link in the description. TMC also offers custom weathering and renumbering to any model, be it brand new or pre-owned. Check out their full pre-owned listings too, where you can be assured of quality as every item is screened and graded by professional staff. TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for all aspects of modelling. First of all though, it's always important when you come to DCC Fit that you ensure the locomotive runs perfectly on DC first. DCC cannot fix a poor running locomotive. So on the DC test track, we're going to just give it some juice, and actually that is immediately apparent on the shortness of this test track that this is still an incredibly smooth running locomotive. I've got it on barely any power and it is moving off with a great deal of ease. That is one of the smoothest mechanisms that I've come across. I would put it comparable to the venerable Heljan 05 shunter, which I actually use as a benchmark for all of my track work, that if that locomotive gets around smoothly, then I know that there are no problems. To get into the locomotive, I'm actually going to use one of the DCC Concepts locomotive servicing cradles, and it's because I don't want to do any damage. The model is so heavy, in case anybody's wondering about weight. It's heavier than my spring balance can cope with, and it's certainly just feeling its weight compared to other locomotives. It's one of the heaviest ready-to-run locomotives that I've got in my collection. Turning the model upside down, we're going to be looking for the screws to get into the tender. So we've got one offset here and another offset here. Whilst we've got the locomotive upside down, I should also point out that Heljan have got a really great system for getting the body off the rest of the locomotive as well. Up here at the front, the screw that holds the front of the body in place is slightly offset, and this means that you can get to it without needing to remove the front bogie. And I think that that is just a subtle, nice touch. It should be pointed out. It's little things like that that means you know that a lot of thought has gone into this. The other screw to get the body of the locomotive off is over here. And unlike many locomotives where it is a huge job to get inside the locomotive part because the DCC socket is in the tender, they never really assume you're going to do that. On this model, 2 screws, lift and away. It really couldn't be easier. Now that we've got these 2 screws undone for the tender, bring this all out from the service cradle, and this whole tender top can now just slide straight off. And we can immediately see that the lack of that coal chute moulded into here has given a huge amount of space. This gives a lot of weight, but we've also got the factory fitted speaker tucked away neatly inside here. And then we've got our 21-pin DCC socket here. There is a lot of space in here to be able to add a stay alive if you really, really want one. But in all honesty, I don't think this locomotive is going to need one. So I've got my 21-pin decoder right here. And I'm going to very, very carefully start to lever up the decoder socket. It's a little bit tricky. They've put in these side pieces which just make gaining access really just a little bit harder than it probably should be. And you've got to be careful. As far as I can tell, the circuit board doesn't appear to be screwed down at all, so we might get lucky just lifting the whole assembly out just to get slightly better access. And then we can very, very carefully lever, slow and steady wins the race. Don't lever it entirely from one side, because what will actually happen is you will end up bending all the pins. So a little bit more there. I can feel it getting looser as we go. And again from this side, final pop, and we are free and clear. So we can discard the blanking plate, and then it's just simply a case of getting our 21-pin decoder, making sure that the pins match up. Don't get any of these wires trapped in place, and then just gently push fit that all the way. And then getting the tender body on really is quite easy. It just slides on over the top of this very heavy casting that forms the basis for the tender. It's one of the easiest models to get into the tender of. On quite a few you get like weird clips and stuff, but on this it just very gracefully just slides down over the top of the big cast chassis, and that really is something that I do like a lot. And then the locomotive is DCC fitted out of the box. That means we've got a DCC address of number 3, but we can change that on the programming track, and then we take this off to Weir Yard to see how well it performs. I mentioned in the DCC fitting just how easy it is to gain access to the locomotive, and one of the things I am going to do is show you that, because this is again simplicity itself, and it does give me an opportunity to show off things such as how the cabs fit together and some of that backhead detail. I also want to show you some of the options that exist to be able to actually add, for example, an additional speaker in the front of this locomotive. Now, with those 2 screws removed, it's then simply a case of just wiggling the body free, and the entire body and cab assembly just lifts up, and this is where this monstrous weight is at in this model. A huge cast piece held on with a single screw that fits inside the body. I'm just going to undo that screw, and then that, I don't know what they've used, it really is heavy. We've then got inside this our small motor. It's a surprisingly small motor. It is just set aside from the metalwork by these rubber rings. We also have some flywheels on both ends with a worm gear there, and this is actually well lubricated from the factory without being excessively lubricated. And you can see the huge block of metal that forms the main body of the chassis. I'm going to put that back on. And one thing I will say is if you want to add a speaker in the smoke box area, that is perfectly easy to do. A small sugar cube speaker down underneath there will give you a really good sound reproduction out through the funnel of the locomotive. And because of the flat sides of this weight, you've got space to be able to run the wire to that speaker very neatly and safely down the inside of the body, out through the back here and through into the tender should you so wish to. Just gently sliding the cab assembly off. It's one of the simplest designs that I've ever seen. We can have a look really quite closely here at just how well they've done that glazing. There's no sign of a glazing bar. It just sits in there as per the prototype. It really is quite well done. The backhead detail on the boiler, you can see there all of those gauges. It really is well realised, and it just shows what you can do with relief detail that's been printed. So you don't need a lot of separately fitted parts to make this work. Putting it back together really is simple too. Just going to line up and slide on the cab to the boiler until it won't slide any further. Screw that down, and then these will just slide down and into place, back over the boiler. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you really have to. Very carefully, I'm going to roll the locomotive into the servicing cradle. Use its own weight to secure the boiler onto the frame, and then very slowly and carefully tighten up the front screw, and then tender drawbar screw is what I meant. Make sure that that is not over tightened, and then the model is back together. That's certainly one of the simplest and easiest locomotives to be able to get into to gain access to the motor. When it came to running the model on Weir Yard, it really did perform exceptionally well. That extra weight that's in there over and above what you would normally expect from a model of this size meant that it had a really sure-footed grip. It made its way through all of the point work without any issues whatsoever, and that included double slips and scissor crossings, as well as more conventional point work. It took in the undulation and the gradients of the main test track really, really well. And it has to be said that the length of the train that I had it pulling was far more than most other locomotives would ever be able to manage. Certainly, other than all-wheel drive diesels, which have plenty of room for additional weight, this model really does pack a punch, and it didn't even feel taxed. I got the distinct impression from it that had I added more wagons to the end of the train, it would have just kept on pulling. I don't think it's quite there with what the Heljan Bayer Garrett managed, but that really was an exceptional locomotive. In fact, you could almost consider that to be two locomotives double-headed. So on that scale, this Gresley 02 really did put in a stellar performance. The actual response of the locomotive was incredibly smooth. It's something that Heljan do really well, with these really smooth high-torque transmissions and motor setups that really do ensure that you're never left feeling that the locomotive is skitterish or on the brink of stalling. I had it running down to an absolute crawl, and it never really gave up at all. It's as smooth as the Heljan 05 shunter, which I've always had as my benchmark for mechanisms, and really it was pleasing to see. All in all, there's nothing at all to fault with this model, and it is an absolutely amazing performer on the track. So we turn now to the scores. First up is build quality, and by and large I felt that this model was pretty well put together. There's a lot of interesting detail, a lot of intricate parts on this, and with a couple of exceptions, they all stayed firmly put. The only reason that one of the gauge glasses came off was because I actually went ahead and dismantled the locomotive to show you guys the insides, and that isn't something that in the normal run of things you would really need to do. Other than that, pretty much everything else felt really firm and in place. I particularly like the fact that the coal rails on the tender are made of metal, and it's those material choices that go a long way to really improve the robustness of this locomotive, and I'm going to give it a 9.5. On running quality, this was where the model really shined. I know that there was a lot of talk with the last release of these models having somewhat unreliable mechanisms, but Heljan has taken on board the criticism and come back with what is a really fine model. It was smooth even down to very slow speeds, and there was not a hint of heating up whilst it was running, even with that exceptionally long train. There's plenty of torque from that motor, and it didn't need a stay alive at all, although there is plenty of space to fit one if you really must. I felt that this mechanism was one of the best that Heljan have produced. Silky smooth and plenty of power. Added with that exceptional weight, this is a firm performer on the track. The locomotive made it through all the point work with no issues whatsoever, and with nothing at all that I can point at to deduct any kind of points from this. It gets the full 10 out of 10. On DCC fitting and innovation, well, DCC fitting is remarkably easy. I do like the construction of the tender, which allows for just those two screws which are carefully cranked to one side and then the other to ensure that nothing gets in their way, and the fact that the tender top just slides straight up and off. There's no pesky clips or anything like that would fight you every step of the way to get inside. And I do like the fact that this really, really well represented coal load has been used to remove the need to model the empty inside of the tender. This in turn has freed up a lot of space for what is one of the simplest installations inside. There's a factory fitted speaker, and that means if you come to do your own sound installation, there really is no bother whatsoever. It's fitted in there, it's wired up, it's good to go. Now, I did say earlier on in this review that there was factory-fitted sound versions, but when I've gone looking, I can't find these. But it is really nice to see that Heljan have allowed for an easy sound installation from third-party installers. There's plenty of room to take something like an ESU Locksound 5, and you really won't be disappointed. I also like on the innovation front the really easy way that there is to get into the locomotive. One of the standout features of this is that screw at the very front of the locomotive. Whereas most manufacturers would have put it centrally and allowed the user to simply have to fight and take the front bogie off, Heljan have actually put it over to one side, and that makes it even easier to get inside. The actual construction of the innards of this locomotive are very well thought out. There is quite simply a huge amount of weight in place, but it's been done in a way that doesn't compromise access to the motor should the need arise to either lubricate the mechanism or indeed for any other reason. There's also room in the smoke box if you wanted to fit a sugar cube speaker to get the sound coming from where on a real locomotive a lot of the sound would. There's space down the boiler to run wires, and it almost seems like it would be rude not to, such has the ease been made that you can add all these features in. It doesn't have a firebox flicker, which does seem to be creeping in as standard on other models, but this is a rerun of an older model, albeit with some of the foibles and issues that had arisen in that first patch completely fixed. I like the fact that Heljan have tooled up for a lot of detail differences, and this means many more members of the class can now be portrayed, and it seems that Heljan have taken a great opportunity to do this, and I'm going to give this a 9.0. On accuracy and quality of finish, there really isn't anything that I can point to that doesn't quite sit right with me. They've really captured that very characteristic running plate really well, and the innovative use of different materials has ensured that making this out of very, very thin plastic has captured all of the detail. The model didn't need the extra weight, so Heljan have taken the opportunity to ensure that this is the perfect thickness and perfect shape. There's a lot of extra detail on here, many added parts, and these all build up into one of the best models that I've seen of late. Of particular note to me is the running gear underneath. I think Heljan really have pulled this off so well. The colouring on the wheels and tyres works, as does the design and fluting and colouring of the coupling rods. It's very robust too. And all in all, the only thing that I can really point to that didn't quite work for me was that the buffer heads felt to be just a little bit on the thick side. So I'm going to give it a 9.9. The next category is value for money, and the RRP on these models is £219. Yes, it has broken the £200 barrier, but I found them discounted down to around £185 and change. And we've got an affiliate link down below to help you find all different livery versions that are available of this model. Now, it might seem a little bit expensive, as ostensibly being a second run of an existing model, with quite a jump in price between them. But Heljan have invested in a lot of new tooling to be able to produce more different versions of this class of locomotives, and they've completely and utterly from top to bottom overhauled that drive mechanism, and they have had great success with this. So ostensibly this is a little bit more like a new model than a rerun of an existing one, and I'm going to give this an 8.5, and that gives us a final score of a very respectable 46.9. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video, more importantly found it informative, and we've got that affiliate link in the description box down below that takes you to TMC, the Model Centre, for all different versions that Heljan are producing in this latest batch. And don't forget as well that you can also specify a value weathering that will really bring alive that satin black finish of the locomotive and make it look something special as part of your fleet. And I'd love to hear from you in the comment section down below. It's a really great way of sharing details that perhaps you've spotted or that you know about this class that maybe didn't feature or weren't picked up in the video. It's a great way to share your experience and your keen eyesight with your other railway modelers and make them fully informed before they make a choice on whether this is a model that's for them. And as always, please like, share and subscribe, and until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabriek.co.uk. Additional support is provided by...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest loco.
Today's video is sponsored by TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for finding all of the models featured today at the best possible price at the link in the description. TMC also offers custom weathering and renumbering to any model, be it brand new or pre-owned. Check out their full pre-owned listings too, where you can be assured of quality as every item is screened and graded by professional staff. TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for all aspects of modelling. I'd like to thank everybody over on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to our Patreon heroes. Without you guys over on Patreon, we really wouldn't be able to keep making the video content that you see on this channel. And don't forget that you can also head on over to patreon.com/JenniferKirk and check out the different tiers of rewards. Thank you so much. You are absolute legends.